Retina Rounds podcast number 11. Today we have the distinct pleasure of welcoming to the Retina Rounds podcast Dr. Tom Albini. Dr. Albini is Professor of Ophthalmology at the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute, where he practices as a surgical retina and uveitis specialist and serves as the co-director of the Bascom Palmer Surgical Vitreoretinal Fellowship. Dr. Albini is also one of the founders of the Vit-Buckle Society, which serves as an outstanding resource for surgical and medical education for early career retina specialists. Dr. Albini talks about his path to retina, the selection process for vitreoretinal fellows, and the joys of elevating the next generation of leaders in retina. Let's check it out.
Well, welcome everybody. It's a great pleasure to have Professor Tom Albini joining us from the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute in Miami, Florida, consistently ranked as the or one of the top eye institutes in the country, and certainly a storied legacy of retina providers and innovators there in central Miami. So, Tom, what a great pleasure to have. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. I can't wait to do this.
Yeah, well, thank you very, very much for joining us. So I gather from our communication that you're just fresh out of clinic. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had a fun day. My scribe is on vacation, and it was an overpacked day for me. I had about 60 patients, and maybe 35 of those were uveitis cases. But me and the uveitis fellow got through it. But it was a retinal detachment and some new Behçet's disease and some white dot syndromes, and a lot of fun.
So it's a typical day at Bascom Palmer. So what's your wildest case of the day?
Well, there's a guy that came in that had, I think, a little bit of anterior uveitis at some point, and that's how I became his doctor. But his workup was negative. He had a horrible conjunctival injection, uveitis, and elevated pressures. And we treated him. Pressure came down, doing fine for a while. The inflammation has been controlled, but his pressures started to spin out of control. And this was all steroids. So all the inflammation was gone completely. And he wound up needing a tube. And so he was scheduled to have a tube on Monday. And he came in today. The other thing is he's 43 years old, otherwise a healthy guy besides all of this. And today he's got an inferior retinal detachment. He's never had any posterior segment pathology. He's got a PVD, and there's an area, a fairly posterior, possibly a break. It's not clearly a break. There's some like a little bit of vitreous traction at the edge of that PVD, pulling along what could be a small break in the temporal macula, and he's got fluid pooled. So we had to, think about doing surgery on him. I don't think it's serous. He's a very anxious person. So he had an episode of emesis in the room while we were talking about the fact that he may need emergent surgery. So anyway, that was not super interesting diagnostically, but it was a challenge in terms of getting the patient ready to go for surgery and what kind of surgery. So normally in a younger patient, I'd like to do just a scleral buckle, but I feel that my scleral buckles do best when the pathology is easily identifiable, where I know exactly where the break is. I'm not convinced that this sort of posterior point of traction is really a full break. It may be. I didn't see any more peripheral breaks. I thought for sure I would find one, so I was examining this poor guy extensively. I couldn't find another easily identifiable break. So I think I'm going to try to do a solo buckle, probably try to do a chandelier buckle, because I feel like that gives me a good visibility of the entire peripheral retina and will allow me to depress and every area and try to see if I can find even, the small little break somewhere that I couldn't identify in clinic. And if I'm confident that the buckle's going to work, then then I'm going to just do a vitrectomy on him also. So we'll see. But the other thing was just going back and forth, is this serous? He's had inflammation in the past. This was purely monocular. There was nothing going on in the other eye. Had never had anything like this, certainly in the past. So there were a lot of dilemmas here. I'm still worried that this is really a serious process, but when it wasn't a smooth detachment, there were corrugations. And so it looked like a rhegmatogenous detachment when in, but it's a difficult case. I don't know why this
And
guy would have all these
the
things
fluid
put
didn't
together.
shift. The fluid didn't
What's that?
shift. The
Fluid did
fluid did
not
not.
shift.
And
Did not shift.
what do you do in a situation like that where you want to put on a buckle and you've got a plan for a tube? How do you
Yeah.
put those two together? What do you guys do at Bascom for that situation?
We have a few doctors that will do a tube on top of a buckle. So he also may wind up getting a trab instead of a tube. So I called the glaucoma doctor and made her aware of what was going on. I think his inflammation has been easy enough to control that I think it's probably easier to do a trab and see if we can get that to stick without it failing than to go with the tube. But if we have to, I think that's what we're going to have to do. I usually leave that decision making up to the glaucoma. So this particular glaucoma doctor, I don't think has ever done that. We may wind up transferring his care to the guy that does do tubes on top of buckles. What do you guys do?
Well, we're pretty judicious about it. We don't put big hardware on the eyes as much as we used to. I don't know what you guys are using at Bascom with regularity, but certainly your team, your mentors there, influenced us, and we moved from a very typical 276 strategy to a band strategy, and it's been working really well in our hands. And so yeah, we're so with a band, it's a little easier to fit a filtering device there. With
Yeah,
a
I think that's
276, it's a lot more challenging.
we mostly do 41 now.
Yeah,
41.
41s, 40s, those are great great strategies, particularly if you have a good exam. Let's talk a little bit, Tom, how you came into retina. So where did you do your undergraduate? When did you know you wanted to go to medical school? Where did you go to medical school? And how did you end up going into ophthalmology and retina?
I come from a medical family, and I remember thinking, when I was in uh, high school and at least the beginning of college, that I was going to try to do something other than medicine. So I initially started college at Princeton, interested in theoretical physics, and uh, I did okay in physics. I mean, I got good grades, but what was obvious was that what would take me like 23 hours of work, the problem sets in physics, there were guys in my class that could do it in like 2 hours. And I realized that I wasn't really gifted in the way that my competition at Princeton in theoretical physics, some of them were. So I eventually decided to focus in on medicine. I remember my mother. It's funny because it's such an odd conversation to remember, but I remember asking me, "So what are you going to do with physics?" And I said, "I don't know. I love it. I want to do it." She said, "Well, what kind of jobs do you get as a physicist?" And I said, "Well, she's like, what can you do besides being a professor?" And I kind of said, I honestly hadn't thought about any sort of application of what I wanted to do. I just loved the theory and I loved the math, but had no real inclination of, that you could go into all these different fields, different kinds of engineering and different things with that background. And she talked me out of it. She's like, "Why don't you become a doctor like, your father and grandfather?" And I was doing well in science classes, and so anyway, I switched over to medicine, and then ophthalmology was off my radar. But it was actually interesting that I was thinking. My father was a academic immunologist, and so when I got to Hopkins, he hooked me up with some people that he knew in the immunology world there, and I worked in a lab and liked it, and I was doing ELISAs and doing a lot of animal studies. And I wound up working with a woman who became an ophthalmologist, and she was dropping out of general surgery. She was like the premier, like top uh, uh, picked to be the chairman of the future um, general surgeon, and she was doing research in xenograft heart transplants in monkeys, and I was watching the monkeys at night for her, and she decided at that point, she said, "I'm not going back to general surgery," and she just did not like the environment. She didn't like, and she decided to become an ophthalmologist. She became a resident at Mass Eye and Ear. She left Hopkins. This was all at Hopkins Med School. She left the general surgery program at Hopkins, and because of that, at that time I was hanging around her a lot, helping her a lot, and she was talking to a lot of ophthalmologists, and so I started thinking this sounded really great. Certainly met a lot of people who loved ophthalmology, and I found that ophthalmologists loved their field, and were much happier than a lot of the other academicians that I met at Hopkins. And the general surgery department at Hopkins, I'm sorry to say, I found to be very toxic. And there was a lot of behavior of the physicians between themselves. I mean, what they were doing for patients was absolutely amazing and really drew me. But I did not like the interaction amongst the doctors. Whereas when I spent time at Wilmer, and so I did one rotation, with the Bresslers, as sort of the general rotation where they and then I spent time with Neil Miller, and I spent time with Dick Green. What a character, and how
He was
influential
the
Dick Green
best.
was.
He was the best. He
so,
was the best.
so anyway, after all of that,
Almost like
I
Ed Norton, he'd come ambling in, and capture the room. Not say much, but man, when he did, everything stopped.
yes, and he really he taught the residents so much. Um, some of it was painful for the residents in the way that he did it. It wasn't always super friendly and
Not
unicorns
everybody
and
got a
rainbows.
trophy. Let's put it that way.
What's that?
Not everybody got a trophy.
Not everybody got a trophy, right? But he was great. So I hung out with him for a month in his lab, and anyway, so after that sort of slew of really amazing experiences, and just feeling that I that the way ophthalmologists approached clinical science, surgery, approached their patients, how much innovation there was in the field, I remember was a major driving force. Clinical trial data, I loved all the new technologies in the OR, and that was it. And so I've never looked back, and it's been a fantastic ride. Then I went to the Doheny USC residency back in those days, and because of my prior work in immunology and my interest in posterior segment disease, I spent a lot of time with Narsingh Rao. I did some basic immunology work, which now off the top of my head, I remember I was culturing T cells, but I'd have to think back to think what exactly they were for. But anyway, I did some lab work with him, and ever since I met the Bresslers, to be honest with you, I knew I was going to wind up posterior segment retina, and I knew I wanted to do surgical retina, and after a year with Narsingh Fellowship doing uveitis, I wound up doing 2 years at Baylor surgical retina. Loved that. It was a great experience. It was a challenge in a lot of ways. It's a very different way of education from the way we educate our fellows here, because at Baylor at the time there was Bentob. Your second year was not entirely, but like 90% Bentob, and you Matt Benz was one of my attendings my first year of fellowship. He had left. Bentob was frankly understaffed while I was there, so I had
Explain to our listeners what Bentob is.
Bentob is a large county hospital in Houston.
For those of you
Has
international listeners, that is code for the way we treat our underserved. So counties in the United States will provide what we call safety net medical care. So for the underserved, or people who have issues with access to choice in our medical system, they wind up at a county hospital, and in many counties, they're staffed by academic centers and actually deliver fantastic care. But the continuity of the faculty can sometimes change, and that's what Dr. Albini is describing right now.
So we had, no permanent attending there at the time that was full time. Obviously, when there were very difficult cases, I could call over an attending from another institution, but you can imagine the logistics of that when somebody had other full clinics and OR days elsewhere. So it was very challenging. The number of cases is huge. Like most counties, a lot of diabetic traction retinal detachments. I do almost zero of those nowadays for a number of reasons, um, but I was doing like 8 a week back then, um, and I was often operating by myself. So, or somebody was a phone call away as opposed to sitting next to me. So I don't think I wouldn't really wish that type of training experience that I had. I don't think it's the best way to do it. I think it's the way a lot of county hospitals used to do it. Our USC experience back then, from what I remember, was a little bit better than that, but not by leaps and bounds. So it was very stressful, I remember, but I tried, obviously, worked my butt off to do the best that I could for these patients that I was taking care of at that point. So that was my Baylor experience. Also, the other part of it was, in the first year, my co-fellow was Ross Lackenpaul, and we had known each other already from Doheny. And Alice McPherson had us in clinic most of the first year rotations. We were with her, and she was starting to slow down. She was in her either late 70s or early 80s at that point. And she was going from doing, she was about a 6-7 case a week surgeon when I first walked in there, which is kind of amazing at that age. But she had slowed down a lot surgically, and her clinic was also slowing down. So it got to the point that Ross and I told her, I said, listen, do you really need both of us here the entire day? And we think we can do, each of us just do like a half day, and we can use the other half day to do research. So I forget the exact numbers. I'm sure Ross knows. It was a large number of papers. Not compared to the people that are applying now. I see so many applications from people out of residency with 40 manuscripts. It's every year there's a couple. We were not in that club, but we as fellows put out something like 20 to 30 papers.
Which
So
is productive.
we had a very productive fellowship, in spite of the fact that the second year we were, really busting our butts at Bentop. So, and then
how did you land at Bascom?
So interesting story. I mean, one of my heroes in life is Ron Smith, and he was one of
Mine
the big
too.
things.
My medical school advisor, God rest his soul.
Yeah, he was an amazing guy. And anyway, without getting too sentimental about Ron, I was his uveitis fellow. Ron, for those that don't know, Ron was a cornea specialist, former president of the academy, chairman at Doheny for I don't know how many, at least 2 decades, I think, if not, and certainly more, I think. But anyway, a very accomplished guy. He also one of the founding members of the American Uveitis Society. So he had the uveitis fellows in his cornea clinic. I was, clearly kind of geared at that point to retina, and he knew that. And one day he pulled me out of cornea clinic, and he said, come into this room. We stepped into an empty exam lane, and he said, I'm going to make your career. And I remember him saying that, and I said, okay, thanks. What do you have in mind? I was worried I was going to wind up in Siberia or Alaska or something. And he said, well, I just got this email on the Uveitis Society listserv from Janet Davis that they're looking for a retina uveitis person at Bascom Palmer, and I think you'd be perfect for it. And I said, well, he knew that my wife, we met in medical school. She was a did internal medicine at UCLA and then wound up doing oncology fellowship at City of Hope. He knew that he was born and raised in Miami, and like a lot of people in Miami, was dying to get back to Miami at all costs. And he kind of triangulated this thing and thought it would be a win-win. So I was flattered and extremely appreciative, and I started talking to Janet Davis at that point. I think I met with her. I mean, this was during my uveitis fellowship, so I had another whole 2 years of fellowship after that. And, the way luck has it, there was somebody else that was supposed to get this position. And that person had a husband that wanted to go to Boston. And so that fell through for them. And lucky for me, that's Lucia Sobrin now, and we met back in those days. So she's very happy up in Boston. I think her husband's like chairman of internal medicine or something. I don't know. He's very high up there. And she's super happy up there. And that opened a lucky door for me. And I slid in, and I've never looked back. So
That's fantastic. That's
I think
fantastic.
there's like a 90% chance that Bascom will be my one and only job. So
Wouldn't that be something? Tell me, you're very involved in the fellowship,
yeah.
and a lot of our listeners are residents, and they're interested, both international and domestic, about how Bascom Palmer chooses both its residents and its fellows. So what do you look for? What's the secret sauce? Everybody's smart. Everybody's got manuscripts. Everybody's got a great narrative. What are you guys looking for at Bascom? What characteristics? What's the Albini secret sauce that makes you like a candidate?
International is really tough. So, and I think that's true at most places, unfortunately, just to get that out there. We have some people that are so great and so qualified, but because of visa issues, it becomes a hurdle. Limitations on medical licenses, on the type of orders that can be signed, are difficult. So we have a good number of international research fellows, and we try to help those people. We've had a small number of people actually wind up either repeating residency in ophthalmology and then going on to doing a fellowship. Does depend a little bit on what type of visas you are. I forget what there's a very high caliber visa that makes things a lot easier. But for a lot of the visa types, it's just hard to get on the ground running and get into a retina fellowship. It's just super selective. There's not that many spots out there, and there's a ton of competition. And it's hard for programs to pick somebody who might have any sort of restriction on what they can do versus a American trained physician. So the vast majority, I think we've had one international clinical fellow in surgical retina since I've been at Bascom that I can remember right now off the top of my head. So, but we've had some that have made it, like I said, by redoing their residency and then fellowship. So the international route is not impossible, but it's extremely, extremely challenging. For U.S. fellows, I think that it has become, in my opinion, I feel like, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like the resume competition is beefing up every year. The number of publications, the number of research opportunities that people have been exposed to and are doing. I think we just get outstanding applicants. We usually get about 70 or 80 applications to go through. I think I forget what percentage of the total that is, but it's a high percentage of the total. And then we based on looking at the resumes and the recommendations, people who are very well trained residents, definitely, there are programs that we have experience taking residents from for fellowship. That's a part of it also.
If you don't mind
And
me interrupting, it's one of the big parts of it because you always take a chief or two in retina, and you still have one of the last chief programs. So maybe you can speak to how that works and how you decide. I mean, you got typically coming out of your Bascom cohort every year, two or three or four of the top applicants in the country, and you cherry pick the one or two, which is great for you guys. But how does that work for the other fellows, and how's the fellowship set up with the chief? That's something that always comes up, and I'm sure people will want to know about that.
yeah, it's so it's something that we actually debate about amongst the faculty, and there's some diversion in opinion, and I think things with time are likely to change. But right now, we have essentially the same program that Norton set up. So, and right now, the uh, the prevailing the prevailing sentiment about it is, and it's not just retina. So this is also becomes a contentious thing because the chief is, even though it's technically set up as a retina fellowship, and the chiefs do the retina surgery for the quote unquote patients, um, or the underinsured patients, we can call them. I mean, now after Obamacare, that whole concept of county versus not county has kind of shifted a little bit, but um, those
Do
patients
they have that
are,
in Florida?
we still have a county hospital. So Jackson still provides, if you live within Miami, Jackson will provide care. But the majority of our patients at Jackson now have insurance. So it's a little bit different. And oftentimes it's insurance that we take. So, in the old days, if you were the Jackson, sorry for those that are, the Jackson is the large county hospital, much like Ben Taub is the large county hospital at at the University of Miami, or affiliated with the University of Miami. Is literally across the street from Bascom Palmer. And when Bascom Palmer was set up, it was set up in a way where it's the only service that I'm aware of where the patients from Jackson that have eye problems all come. The second floor at Bascom Palmer is the floor for the Jackson patients, and has the emergency room in it. And those patients traditionally were seen by the chief residents if they had retina problems, surgery, and those are a lot of traction retinal detachments, a little bit like what we were seeing at Ben Taub, but a ton of everything in retina that you can think of. Our especially early on, our biggest Avastin injectors were not Phil Rosenfeld or Carmen Puliafito. It was the chief resident, that was doing all these. So it's a very busy service, and the chiefs have always been chosen from the graduating, uh, and they do those surgeries. Whereas we have two fellows each year that are either current chiefs, and they're the ones that are operating on and seeing the patients from the county side, or they're the upcoming chiefs, so the chiefs that are going to be the chiefs the next year, and they're rotating through the attending um, patients, doing surgery with attendings and doing clinic with attendings, just like the two and two, so two in the first year, two in the second year, non-chief track fellows. The experiences are different. There's definitely more autonomy in the chief track. There is uh, there is more teaching in the non-chief track. So um, we have a number of attendings, myself included, that are aggressively turning over cases to fellows. So it's not as if the kind of stereotypes or thoughts about this that you hear that are misguided are that the non-chief track um, is just watching attendings operate, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I would say the difference is that if you're in the chief track, you're doing a lot of surgery, but you're doing it oftentimes alone unless you reach out for help, which is at Bascom very readily available at the beginning of the year, the academic year. But 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 in the non-chief track, you're doing surgery with an attending there, um, take over. And I feel that's one of the most exciting things about surgery for me is for most things that I do now, I feel that I remember when I started operating at Bascom, I would get very nervous. And I think this must have been true in fellowship, but I remember it more acutely when I was in the hot seat as an attending, as an early attending. The night before surgery, I would go through every case I was going to do the next day, every single step, including visualizing where I was going to make the sclerotomies, and then asking myself, what are the, five most likely things to go wrong, and what am I going to do about every case? And I would go through this exercise. It would take me a good amount of time before I would fall asleep. And I stopped doing that at some point. So at some point, you get comfortable with the actual surgery. And then, when I started at Bascom, I didn't have a fellow operating with me. And then actually, when Tim Murray left, that changed the schedule a lot for the fellows. I started having more fellows pretty much on every case after that point. And then, so I was always a strong believer in letting fellows do as much of the surgery as I thought was prudent for them to do. And I still have that philosophy. And my game is to figure out how the fellow's going to screw up, how to prevent him from doing it, hopefully before the case starts. And if it happens during the case, or if I see it happening during the case, prevent it from happening. And if I can't prevent it, then fixing it. So I take over when I see people flailing, but for the most part, after the fall of the first year, there's not a lot of flailing. Our guys get a lot of surgery from the beginning. There's a lot of different rotations with different surgeons. They come in with really a great repertoire of techniques, even months into the fellowship, and so it's pretty rare. I think I've taken over a case, I'd say maybe 5 times this past 6 months. For the
It's
most
amazing.
part.
Whatever you're doing, it's working because you guys are turning out fantastic product, and in terms of the skill level of your graduates. And one of the things that's really interesting is, um, and I wonder if this is true, I bet it's hard to predict who turns out better every single year, whether it's the chief track or the non-chief track, because they're very different. And the chief track, you've got a level of comfort with them. They know the system, their level of integrity and reliability, and so you can lean on them a little harder. But the people who come from
I'll tell
outside
you, I'll tell you
are
this.
exceptional, I'm sure.
We've Yes, the biggest difference is the obvious one. The chief track people, because they're always internal, and I'm not saying that I don't want to officially voice my opinion on, on the system,
Don't, and we
but
can cut it out if
but
you do,
it's
so
a
don't
point of
worry
high
about it.
controversy. But I do want to be totally upfront and honest about it, and it is what it is, and it's a beloved system, and I think it's a great training platform. Those people we know because they're coming from within. And so it's rare that we have a chief that we're concerned about. And if there is something where we think somebody might, not be the optimal, might not have fantastic outcomes as we're used to, we usually see it coming way down the pike, and realize it. Not everybody's a fantastic surgeon. Not every there's different
And some people need to
attributes
grow
and
into it and need a different training track, and
quality.
that's all there is to it.
When we take people from the outside, though, it's you can sometimes be fooled.
Yep,
He's
you
going
sure
to be
can. You
so
sure can.
so
That
that
is a fair euphemism. And so that's why I was asking you that original question. What is it you're looking at? Because the truth is, everybody's smart.
yeah.
Everybody's got some research. Some people are more innovative than others. So it's very, very hard to choose. And then I wanted to ask you, as your fellows are departing Bascom, so your graduates, and they're looking at where to go work, how do you advise them on what sort of career track to take? I mean, the obvious answer is look internally, see what you really want. But do you sort of size them up and say, hey, this is going to be a good fit for you? Or if you really want to try academics, or it's obvious that you're an academic. How involved do you get in that? I'm sure very.
Yeah, I mean, let me. Those are two excellent questions. I don't want to miss the opportunity to answer the first one, and that is that at Bascom, there's certain criteria that you're going to have to jump through. There's a type of resume to make it to the 20 to 30 people that we interview every year. Uh, that's based on letters of recommendation, and I hate to say it, but there's no doubt that if I get a letter from Steve Schwartz saying that somebody's amazing, or I get a letter from somebody who I don't know because they're, someplace that I've never been or haven't met at a meeting or whatever, there's a different way to those things. So it's not right that it's like that. It bothers me, but it does kind of matter who and where you come from. And I think anybody who tells you that's not true is not being honest. The retina world is small. Uh, we know each other, and so word of mouth is a big thing, and the recommendations are a big part. But I'd say that's kind of the sort of like getting in hurdle, and then the next thing that we look for at Bascom, as I'm sure lots of other places, is how much of a team player somebody is. So everything at Bascom is very much a team sport. We want people who are going to get along, and we want people who are really interested, at least for that 2 years, maybe not for their entire career, but at least for their fellowship, that we're really convinced that they want to be there primarily to take care of patients. They have a lot of patients. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of off
We at
hours.
UCLA, it was called total immersion.
Yeah, total immersion. Great. Yeah, great term for it. Exactly. And we want them to be happy in patient care total immersion. And what it's in contrast to is, for example, somebody could be an amazing researcher. Like, I've known people who started 10 companies and all, but they weren't necessarily great residents and fellows because their true immersion was elsewhere and not
Well, I'm
in the
sure you
clinic.
know this, but in the olden days, you had to also pass through the Vic Curtain filter, which basically meant if you came from a medical family or actually had three squares a day, you probably weren't going to get looked at because he wanted somebody who was hungry, literally and figuratively, and had something to prove. And so, but that was, look, you mentioned
Yeah, I don't
earlier that,
think we have that exact process going anymore. I'd say now it's more team player humility. I think is a big thing for the personality type that we're looking at. But we want people that are going to be happy doing the kind of work that we're doing, and that everybody's going to be happy working with them.
well,
And
without coming
that's
down on either side of the issues that you're alluding to, I will say this. You alluded to you're still running the system that Norton put in place. Ed Norton was a smart guy, and he built a Shangri-La of retina and ophthalmology and trained the giants upon whose shoulders we stand to a large extent, many of them. And it's not a bad idea to keep the old ways going to a certain extent. Although we all
yeah,
think that we can add something to it, to tear it down and build it up again from scratch may not be the best answer. And I hope that doesn't put you off because I know you're an innovator. Well, that's really interesting. So let's go to the second question I asked you, which is how do you advise people where they're going to go? A lot of
yeah,
our listeners are early in their career and some have limited choices because they work in a system that's very regimented. They're going from one spot to the next spot to the next spot, and it's just preordained. But others work in systems where they have a choice to go work either for the government or for an academic hospital, for a community-based private practice, or for an academic practice, or for private equity. There's so many different choices in some of these systems. How do you advise your fellows? Do you advise your fellows?
Well, I certainly don't. I don't think I've ever been so bold as to tell somebody that they should do one thing or another. I think that most people have a feeling. We have a good variety. I forget exactly what the number is, but we've had a lot of fellows recently from both tracks, from the chief track and the outside track, go into both academics and private practice. I know that there are some of our competing programs that sort of stigmatize going into private practice, or maybe that's gone by the wayside. I don't know, but at least a decade ago, we're trying to push everybody into academics. We're certainly not that type of a place. We expect a certain amount of academic work from the fellows for sure. A lot of presentations, we expect people to write at least a few papers, but we don't expect people to write 10, 20 papers. We've had plenty of fellows who have put out 20 plus papers in addition to being totally immersed in clinic and surgery, as we've talked about. But we don't hold it against somebody if that's not the life that they choose. We've had many fellows from both tracks go into private practice, and people that have made huge contributions to retina within private practice. I mean, not to single anybody out, but Charlie Wyckoff always comes to mind, and then and Jay Sridhar, for example, comes on the academic side. We've had people just made big contributions and are
Enormous, both
fantastic.
of them. And so, really, what I would say is you're training leaders, and whatever it is you guys are doing, you're doing something right. And I don't know exactly what it is, but it's magnificent.
I would
So
say that it has a lot to do with connecting and networking. And I don't know. I'm not going to compare us to anybody else. I just know that we like our fellows to go out to meetings. We support fellow presentations at meetings, and we support trying to get them integrated and going out there, and we support innovation and new ideas. And so I think those, I'm sure every program does everything I just said, but if I had to try to kind of figure out what it is, also we also just we've been lucky in terms of, like you said before, the cream of the crop kind of thing. That is extremely helpful. Bascom is a great residency. We get a lot of great residents. We get a lot of great fellowship applicants, and a lot of people want to come here for whatever the reasons are. Miami is a nice place to live, but I think it's mostly Bascom is just a great place to be learning how to do. So
Bascom has a lot of Mount Olympus real estate there. It's you guys are really, it's an amazing place. Let's
it's
talk.
very, very kind of you to say that. But to go back to what to tell people about their future careers, I tell them think think out of the box a little bit, and don't let yourself be put into pigeonholes, because you can join an old, I shouldn't say old, but a private practice that's had the same members for a long
Established.
time. And thank you, established is the word I'm looking for. Private practice, and you can come in and rejuvenate that practice with clinical research, and if that's your thing, or you can become the next president of the academy, and you can work on your. But what I tell fellows is that it's follow through, it's being open to new activities. I think there needs to be a healthy, not an unhealthy amount, because you can overdo it, but a healthy amount of trying things in your young career. Say yes a lot.
That's a little different than the way the fellowship was at UCLA when I was running it. For For us, it was say yes only. You could, there, there, there is no no. There, so there's
Yeah, I
almost
mean,
like Yoda. It's not, there is no try, only do. There is no yes, no no, especially to the staff. Always say yes.
I
Uh,
think yeah, and I think the gear is that, as you become more seasoned, and I'm talking about the years after starting your career, whatever it is, there is a time where you have to start. You realize there are some things you're just not that you may not like, or maybe, God forbid,
I
you're not
can't
even good at
do
a
whatever.
particular thing, or whatever. But you figure out where your area is that you want to focus on. So I think, but yeah, so try different things, and if you follow through and you do a good job and you're pleasant to work with, you will get asked. Once somebody finds out that you're good at something, you will be asked to do it over and over and over again.
That's right.
And then you're on a trajectory, and you're going to do whatever it is that you want to do.
That's
But I,
fantastic,
I think
Tom.
you can do that in private practice and in academics.
Absolutely. And find satisfaction, happiness, and contribute, prevent blindness, and restore vision. And your people come out so talented. You've got such a rigorous educational program with the reading and the presentations and the case conferences and the faculty they're exposed to. When you overlay that with the historical significance of the institution and the volume of patients that they're seeing and just the way the place runs, it's gives me goosebumps thinking about the few times I've been back to Bascom to speak and interact. It's just such a treat. Let's let's change the subject. If my memory serves me correctly, you've had something to do with the Vit-Buckle Society. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
Tell us about
um,
the Vit-Buckle Society for those of our international listeners who don't know it, or those of us who are on the tail end of our bell-shaped curve, whether it's too early or too late, what we can look forward to as we learn about the Vit-Buckle Society, because it's really become a very vibrant, fantastic group of people.
my favorite thing about the Vit-Buckle Society is that Jay Sridhar is going to be president in a couple of years, as is uh, Yoshi, and Andrew Rachitsky is currently president. So these are all people that I first met either as medical students or residents, and it's been an amazing uh, experience for me because I was amongst a small group of people. My co-fellow Ross was in that group, and who's chairman now at UCI. Nina Barakal was my colleague at Bascom Palmer. Um,
Charlie,
John Kitchens, other people. That we started
Charlie,
this group.
Charlie Mang,
Charlie Wyckoff was in that.
Charlie
Was in that.
Mango.
Oh yeah, how can I forget? We would actually clearly not exist if it wasn't for Mango. He was the only responsible one out of the group that made sure we kept money in our bank account. So I think that uh, uh, that group started with a simple idea. We were sitting. There were a bunch of us that were sitting around a table at one of the Retina Fellow meetings. Um, uh, we noticed that at the time there wasn't any meeting that where people were showing surgical videos to each other on a regular basis, and that technology was around. Um, and I thought it was fascinating that I was talking to some people from Wills and found out that they do their Vit buckles completely differently than I was taught at Baylor. So we were taught at Baylor to put the buckle on second. There was at least one attending at Wills, I guess, that was putting the buckle on. That was sorry. I was taught to put the buckle on first and then do the vitrectomy. And somebody was doing the opposite at Wills, and I said, "Wow, I would love to just see how that works and how that's accomplished." And there were a million other things. Once you start talking about surgery, you realize there are all these fine points that when you're sitting in your bubble of your own fellowship, learning how to do things, not going to find it. So we said, we should
That's
have
the
a meeting.
exact point. That's the exact point of Retina Rounds. Why Pradeep Prasad is sharing a case every day, and they're often different. And he's taking contributions globally. And whether it's put the buckle on before, put the buckle on afterwards, put the trocars in this way, peel the membrane that way. There are lots of ways to get to the end, and there are lots of good ways to get to the end, and lots of common
So
pitfalls. So that's what's the genius of the
I
Vit-Buckle
think it's
Society.
great you guys are doing this. We didn't have streaming video, was not so much a thing back then, but we had PowerPoint was out for maybe 4 or 5 years at that time, and we had video, some surgical video, and so the idea was to have a meeting where people shared videos, and we started doing that as a dinner meeting at ASRS, and then at different academy and angiogenesis. We did it in a year or two. So we developed this format that really worked. And the goal was to have a collegiate, respectful environment. We didn't want sort of the old school professor chastising everybody for not doing things correctly. We wanted kind of an open environment, but we also wanted a realistic one. So if something was really off the wall, that people expressed their opinions about what it was that they saw, and we wanted a place where trainees would feel comfortable asking questions. That was what we were going for, and we decided we were going to create the society that was going to be for new attendings and fellows, and but younger surgeons, and that would have great input from older generations of surgeons that could come in, because we noticed that the meetings were just so much better when you had great people there to comment on the cases in addition to the. So that's what happened, and at one point, the momentum just kept building, and I never thought of it anything than a dinner meeting when we started it. I don't think any of us really did. And then eventually it got so popular, we had like 15 people, then 30, then 60, then 80. Then we did like 4 in 1 year. Then we said, okay, maybe we should have our own meeting. And then we went for it. And it's really one of the things
And
in
how
my
big was the
career.
meeting in Austin? How big was the meeting in Austin this
So
year?
now we had like 550 registrants. Um, and over 150 industry people there, which I think was a lot for almost any retina meeting. So it's now a big meeting. I mean, it's up
It's a
there.
real group. It's a respected group. It's a real group. You did a really smart thing. You did a
And
really
the other
smart
thing,
thing.
I don't want, I can go on about, for
Yeah.
hours and drone on about this, but the other thing I have to say that's been so cool about the group is that we decided in the beginning that the 10 of us that started the whole thing, we're going to stop doing it at some point. I mean, that date did change. We said 10 years, and it was 11, 12, 13, whatever. But eventually we did find a way to pass it on to a younger generation. That's why I opened up saying I'm so excited that the new generation of leaders that are within VBS are taking over, and they're doing it absolutely. It's so much. I was just on Monday night. I was on the call. I'm no longer on the board. I don't have any voting rights, but they still allow me to call in. I'm on a position kind of thing, so I just listen and occasionally chime in. But it's so amazing what the organization has come now. There's all these different groups, the focus group and the rounds. We also have like a rounds online that we're doing. There's a VB Academy with surgical videos for fellows that are so. Anyway, there's all this different stuff going on. It's an amazing organization, and for those that don't know, it's a great meeting in terms of the surgical content, in terms of the types of talks. It's a little bit out of the box compared to the more established meetings, and it's also a heck of a lot of fun. There's a lot of emphasis on social networking, both with industry and with all the surgeons from around the world that come to the meeting. So
I would say
uh,
that you're right. I think the meeting, that's probably, you get two really or three really great features of this meeting. One, that you're turning over leadership because the new group is always better. And
yeah,
that's fantastic. Two, that it's surgically oriented. It's fantastic. And three, that you're committed to innovation and collegiality. It's pretty impressive. The opportunities that I've had to interact at BBS were really fun. And I would say almost too much fun. I think I was at the Vegas meeting, if I remember correctly. Uh, But the other really
Yeah.
smart thing you did is you hired medical conference planners to run it. They run a
Yeah.
great meeting. Karen and her team are unsurpassed, and so that's fantastic. And you have a big international group now coming as well, don't you?
Yeah, we have we through industry support, we're able to offer a small number of scholarship travel stipends for people to come from as far away as India, Africa. We've had speakers. So we're predominantly it's still very much U.S. There's a good contingent from Canada, and there's always been from the beginning, for whatever reasons, maybe because we were in Miami and because of Nina, but there's always been a good Mexican showing at the meeting. But the Latin American in general, now we have lots of people coming from Brazil. We have more people coming from Europe. And like I said, we had a speaker from describing, traction retinal detachment surgery in Africa, and the challenges there from all over Asia, Japan. So it's becoming more and more international, and
It's
it's a really great
it's
group.
arrived. I was uh, talking to Naresh Mandava on a previous Retina Rounds podcast, and he was mentioning the first paper he did on vitrectomy buckle with Stanley Chang, where they did something like 120 consecutive, published 100 consecutive vitrectomy buckles for retinal regmentations, retinal detachment, and they were all successful. And then we were
Wow.
laughing and said, "Well, they named a society after it." So it's a good.
We've got to highlight that paper. I got to find it. Stanley was
Yeah,
our first a
I
keynote speaker
remember.
also, so there's a symmetry in that.
I remember, and what an honor it is to have Stanley
As was
participate.
Buzz Krieger was
I
also at
know.
the
I
meeting.
remember. I
A
remember.
highlighted speaker, and I met Buzz through Charlie Mango and Trail, but I met him socially through Charlie, and uh, he really personified the spirit that we were going for. Other people, Harry Glenn was big involved in that too, but Buzz was just such a great teacher, such a humble guy who just cared about everybody, patients, but also everybody that he taught and his colleagues and everything. So he was a big inspiration for us.
To round this out, not unlike Ron Smith, Buzz loved his colleagues, especially his junior colleagues, and knew early on that the greatest privilege of what we do is passing along knowledge and learning from our students. And that's really the treasure. And that's why you get so much pleasure out of seeing the next generation take over. Although I will say with certainty that Alexandra is smarter than all of us. And so it's no surprise that it's doing as well as it's doing.
Yeah.
Um, Tom, it is such a pleasure talking to you. I could talk to you for hours. I want to thank you for participating and congratulate you on your career. And as co-director of the fellowship program at Bascom, you are stewarding together with Nina a spectacular program. As I said, we all think of it as Mount Olympus, or at least a lot of the real estate on Mount Olympus in ophthalmology. And it's really special to have you here. And I will say that it's the world of theoretical physics lost that they couldn't keep you, but we're happy to have you. And thanks for sharing such intimate details about the Bascom program. Getting a look behind the curtain at what's really happening there is so special for all of us, and really, really a treat, Tom. Thank you very much for joining us and contributing.
Steve, you're very kind, and I think we, like everywhere, we do the best we can for our patients, and we try to be a strong team and work well with each other, and appreciate all the amazing people we have in ophthalmology, both at Bascom, but really in the entire world of ophthalmology. We're a great bunch. Retina's a little bit better than the other parts of ophthalmology, but it's an amazing bunch of people, and I'm thrilled that I wound up here through those circuitous routes of watching monkeys at night. It
Well,
got me to be a
another
retina
way to think
surgeon.
about it is your mother was right.
Yes, that's true too.
which may be a take-home lesson for our listeners. Anyway, what a pleasure, Tom, and we'll talk soon. I look forward to seeing you soon, and thanks for taking the time after such a long clinic.
Take care, Steve. Thanks.
Bye bye. Thanks.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this video, please visit us at RetinaRounds.com. There you can sign up for our email list. You'll get a notification every time a new video is posted. And if you have an interesting video or a tip or trick that you'd like to share, please follow the links on our website and you can upload your video there. Thanks so much for watching.